They gave the old house as a joke at the widow's expense, without imagining what she would find there. Sarah Miller held tightly to the little hands of her two small children, 6-year-old Toby and 4-year-old Sam, as she looked at the cracked wooden structure that was now her new home. The scorching sun of the small rural town beat down on her tired face, and the yellow dress she wore already showed signs of the long moving day. The cruel laughter of Mr. Silas still echoed in her ears. The man had handed over the keys to the old house as payment for a debt her late husband Thomas had with him. He said he was being generous, but Sarah knew from the mocking looks and whispered comments of the neighbors that this was considered a joke in poor taste. The house looked more like an abandoned shelter than a home. Mrs. Enid, the closest neighbor, shook her head with pity as she swept her porch. The other women on the street gathered in small groups, whispering and discreetly pointing at Sarah's new dwelling. She could hear fragments of the conversations. Poor Sarah, fooled again. That house isn't even worth the land it sits on. The children were too quiet, something that worried Sarah. Toby, normally talkative and curious, just stared at the house with wide eyes. Sam hid behind his mother's legs, intimidated by the strange environment and the curious stares of the neighbors. With a few coins left in her pocket and a mixed feeling of humiliation and determination, Sarah took a deep breath and walked to the front door. The wood was so old it gave way with a simple push, creaking loudly enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. The inside of the house was even worse than she imagined. The smell of mold and dampness invaded her nostrils, and she had to hold her breath for a moment. The walls showed dark stains of water damage, and in the corner of the main room there was clear evidence that rats had made nests there. The roof had several leaks, creating puddles of dirty water on the uneven plank floor. Toby was the first to speak, his tiny voice echoing in the empty space. "Mommy, are we really going to live here?" Sarah crouched down to be at her children's level, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "For now, yes, my love. But Mommy is going to make everything very nice for you. You can trust me." Sam began to cry softly, and she picked him up, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. How could a 28-year-old woman, alone in the world since Thomas passed 6 months ago, turn that place into a home for her children? The first night was a true nightmare. The rain that began to fall in the late afternoon revealed the extent of the roof's problems. Sarah spent the entire night moving buckets and pots to catch the water falling from the ceiling. The boys slept poorly, frightened by the strange noises of the old house and the sound of the constant dripping. When the sun rose, Sarah was exhausted. Her dark hair was stuck to her face from sweat and dampness, and the yellow dress that was her only good piece of clothing was now dirty and wet. Even so, she got up determined to start cleaning. While sweeping the room that would be the children's bedroom, she found some yellowed letters under a loose floorboard. Curiosity got the better of her, and she sat on the floor to examine the old papers. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot, as we are just starting out. Now continuing, the letters were addressed to a certain Maestro Arthur Harrison, and the most recent one, from 5 years ago, came from a law office in the neighboring city. Sarah read with growing attention, trying to understand the complicated legal content. There was mention of copyright for a song and unclaimed royalties. Her heart raced. Could it be that house held more secrets beyond its crumbling structure? She carefully stored the letters among her few clothes, deciding to investigate when she had the opportunity. The next day brought new challenges. The kitchen faucet wasn't working, forcing Sarah to fetch water from the public well 2 blocks away. The children followed her in silence, carrying small buckets and trying to help as best they could. At the well, she encountered other women from the neighborhood. Mrs. Hattie, a lady with graying hair, was the first to comment. "Sarah, dear, are you sure you want to stay in that house? Everyone here knows Mr. Silas pulled a fast one on you." "It's true," agreed Mrs. Mabel, a plump woman who lived on the corner. "That place has been falling apart for years. No one wanted to buy it, not even for a low price." Sarah felt her face flush with shame but maintained her dignity. "It's what I have for now. I'll find a way to make things better." "Poor thing," whispered Mrs. Hattie to her friend, but loud enough for Sarah to hear. "So young and already going through so much hardship." Back at the house, Sarah let the children play with sticks in the backyard while she continued cleaning. That's when she found, hidden behind an old cabinet in the kitchen, a small wooden door she hadn't noticed before. The door was low, almost like a built-in cabinet, but when she managed to open it after much effort, it revealed a small secret room. Her heart leapt when she saw, leaning against the back wall, an old guitar in a worn leather case. With hands trembling with anxiety, she removed the instrument from its hiding place. Along with the guitar were several sheets of staff paper with handwritten music, and a hardcover notebook that appeared to be a diary. Sarah didn't know how to play any instrument, but something about those papers intrigued her deeply. The handwriting was neat, from someone clearly educated, and the notes in the margins suggested these were original compositions. That afternoon, while the children napped, she went to the only school in town in search of someone who could help her understand what she had found. Mr. Henry Bennett, a retired 65-year-old teacher who gave private music lessons, agreed to take a look at the papers. "Good heavens," murmured Mr. Henry when he saw the sheet music. "These are very well-crafted compositions. Look here, this melody. I know this song." He went to the old piano in his room and began to play. The melody that came from the instrument was familiar, very familiar. Sarah was certain she had heard that song on the radio many times. "Teacher, is this song still played on the radio today?" "Yes, it is, my dear. It's a very famous song from the 80s, Song of the Heartland, sung by Jackson Dean. It was a big hit back then and is still popular today." Sarah felt a chill in her stomach. If those papers really proved that the house's former resident was the true composer of that song, it could completely change her life and her children's. On the way back home, she stopped at the small law office in town. Dr. James Sterling, a middle-aged man with thick glasses and graying hair, received her with some impatience. "Ma'am, I am very busy today. What do you want?" Sarah explained about the letters she found and showed him the documents. At first, Dr. James showed little interest, but when he saw the letterhead from the law firm mentioned in the letters, his demeanor changed completely. "Where did you say you found this?" "In the house I received as payment for a debt. It belonged to Maestro Arthur Harrison." "Doctor." James flipped through the papers with increasing attention, his eyebrows rising with each page. "Mrs. Sarah, this could be very important, but you need to understand that copyright cases are extremely complicated. It would be necessary to prove not only that this Arthur Harrison was truly the composer, but also that the rights now belong to you." Sarah left the office with more questions than answers, but with a spark of hope lit in her chest. Perhaps, just perhaps, that house everyone considered a joke could be her salvation. That night, after putting the children to sleep on the old mattresses she had managed to borrow from Mrs. Enid, she sat on the living room floor with Maestro Arthur's diary and a candle, since she still hadn't managed to get the electricity reconnected. The yellowed pages told the story of a lonely man who dedicated his life to music. He spoke of the inspiration for Song of the Heartland, describing how the melody came to him during a sleepless night as he watched the stars from the backyard of his humble home. "This music was born from my soul," he wrote in one entry. "She is my dearest daughter, the only thing of value I can leave to the world. One day, I hope she is recognized as my creation." The following pages revealed the composer's bitterness at seeing his music become popular in the voices of other artists, without him receiving any recognition or payment. He had tried for years to prove his authorship, but never had the resources or legal knowledge to fight the big record labels. Sarah closed the diary with tears in her eyes. She felt a deep connection with that unknown man, who, like her, had been looked down upon and cheated by the more powerful. The following days brought new challenges. Mr. Silas appeared at her door accompanied by 2 friends, all clearly drunk. "Hey, Sarah," he said with a slurred voice, "I heard you've been rummaging through the old junk in the house. I hope you're not thinking of stealing anything that isn't yours." "I'm not stealing anything, Mr. Silas. The house and everything in it were given as payment for the debt." "Yeah, but just the house. I don't remember saying anything about old Arthur's belongings." Sarah felt her blood boil, but she kept calm. Toby and Sam were behind her, clearly frightened by the situation. "You yourself said you were giving me the house with everything inside. Don't go back on your word now." Mr. Silas gave a mocking laugh. "That one was always too clever for her own good. Be careful not to get into trouble, woman." After the men walked away, Sarah locked the door with a chair since the lock didn't work. Her children looked at her with eyes full of fear. "Mommy, is that man going to hurt us?" asked Toby. "No, my son. Mommy won't let anyone hurt you." But inside, she was terrified. If Mr. Silas really decided to cause trouble, she would have no way to defend herself. She was a woman alone, without resources, and without many friends in town. The next morning, she decided to seek help. She went to Mrs. Beatrice's house, the only person who had been kind to her since she arrived in town. Mrs. Beatrice was a 70-year-old lady, a widow for a long time, who lived alone in a simple but well-kept little house. "Sarah, my dear, come in. You look worried." Sitting in the small kitchen, drinking coffee brewed in a cloth filter, Sarah told her about her discovery and about Mr. Silas's threats. Mrs. Beatrice listened in silence, shaking her head from time to time. "My girl, I remember Mr. Arthur. He was a very polite man, always greeting everyone on the street. He lived alone in that house for over 20 years. I always heard him playing guitar in the late afternoon." "Did you ever get to talk to him about music?" "Not really, no, he was very reserved. But once I was passing by his house and heard a very beautiful melody. I stopped to listen and he noticed. He came to the window and said it was a song he had composed. That was many years ago when I was still younger." Sarah's heart raced. "Do you remember what the melody was like?" Mrs. Beatrice hummed a few bars, and Sarah recognized it immediately. It was "Song of the Heartland," without a doubt. "Mrs. Beatrice, would you remember this if you needed to tell other people? For a judge, for example?" "Of course I would, dear. Why would I lie about something like that?" Sarah left Mrs. Beatrice's house with renewed hope. She now had a witness who could confirm that Arthur Harrison really was the composer of the famous song. Back at Dr. James's office, she told him about the conversation with the neighbor. The lawyer seemed more interested now, especially after she mentioned she had found handwritten sheet music and a diary. "Mrs. Sarah, if we can prove that this man was indeed the original composer, and that you are the rightful heir to the rights, this could yield a very significant sum. This song still generates royalties to this day. About how much would it be? It's hard to calculate without a detailed analysis, but we're talking about decades of unpaid royalties. It could be enough to completely change your life and the children's." Sarah left the office in a state of shock. It was hard to believe that old house, which everyone considered a joke, could hold the secret to her financial salvation. But the problems were far from over. That afternoon, as she returned from the market with the few groceries she could afford, she found Mr. Silas waiting at her door, this time accompanied by his wife, Mrs. Margaret. "Sarah," said Mrs. Margaret with a sharp voice, "it's time for you to stop this fantasy about music and inheritance. Everyone in town is already saying you're making up stories to get easy money. I'm not making up anything. I found documents and proof in the house." "Proof of what?" retorted Mr. Silas. "That old Arthur was a composer? Everyone knows he was a bit crazy, always saying he had written famous songs. No one ever took it seriously." "Then why are you both so concerned with what I'm doing?" The question took the couple by surprise, and they exchanged nervous glances. "We just don't want you to be embarrassed," said Mrs. Margaret, but her voice didn't sound convincing. After they left, Sarah began to suspect there was something more behind the couple's opposition. Perhaps they knew more about Arthur Harrison than they admitted. That night, she decided to investigate the small secret room where she had found the guitar more thoroughly. With the help of a flashlight she borrowed from Mrs. Enid, she examined every inch of the space. That's when she noticed a small bulge on the back wall. Pressing the spot, she discovered it was a second secret door, even smaller than the first. Her heart was pounding as she managed to open it. Inside the second hiding place, she found a small metal box containing even more important documents. There were original contracts between Arthur Harrison and a New York record label, dated 1982. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the contents. The papers clearly showed that Arthur had tried to sell Song of the Heartland to the record label, but had been cheated. The contract stated he would receive only a single, small payment, forfeiting all future rights to the song. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing, but the most important part was in the letters attached to the contracts. Correspondence between the record label and the music producer responsible for releasing the song showed they knew perfectly well that Arthur was the true author. They had deliberately taken advantage of his inexperience and financial need to steal his creation. Sarah held the papers with hands trembling from anger and emotion. There was the definitive proof that an injustice had been committed, and that now she had a chance to set it right. The next morning she returned to Dr. James's office with the new documents. The lawyer could barely contain his excitement when he saw the original contracts. "Mrs. Sarah, this is pure gold. With these documents we have an irrefutable case. The issue now is establishing that you are the rightful heir to the rights." "How do we do that?" "First, we need to prove you are indeed the legal owner of the house and everything inside it. Then we'll need to demonstrate that there are no other heirs to Mr. Arthur with claims on his assets." Sarah spent the following weeks chasing documentation. The house transfer process was still not complete, and she discovered that Mr. Silas had been deliberately negligent with the paperwork. During her research at the town's records office, she made a disturbing discovery. Mr. Silas had lied about the origin of Thomas's debt. The documents showed he had loaned money to her husband with predatory interest, and that Arthur's house had been used as collateral, without Thomas knowing its true value. The revelation left her furious. Mr. Silas had not only taken advantage of her desperation after losing her husband, but had orchestrated a plan to take possession of a property he knew had potential value. Determined not to be intimidated, Sarah sought another lawyer in a nearby city. Dr. Victoria Vance was a young woman, about 35 years old, who had just opened her own practice after years working at a large firm. "Sarah, your case is fascinating," said Dr. Victoria, after examining all the documents. "Not only do we have solid evidence about the song's authorship, but we also have a clear case of usury and bad faith on the part of this Mr. Silas." "What does that mean?" "It means we can attack on two fronts. First, we'll claim the copyright to the song. Second, we'll challenge the legality of the loan contract your husband signed." Sarah felt a mix of hope and fear. If she won the case, her life would change completely. But if she lost, she'd be in an even worse situation, as she would have to pay the legal costs. "Doctor, I don't have money to pay the fees." "Don't worry about that now. We'll work on a percentage of the recovered value. If we win, I get paid. If we lose, you owe me nothing." As the legal proceedings began to take shape, Sarah's life in the small town became increasingly difficult. The news about her fight for the copyright had spread, dividing the population. On one side, there were people like Mrs. Beatrice and some other women in town who supported her, admiring her courage for standing up to powerful men like Mr. Silas. On the other side, there were those who believed she was being greedy and opportunistic. The children began to suffer the consequences of this division. Toby came home crying after a fight at school, where other boys called him son of the music liar. Sam, always more sensitive, started having nightmares and refused to play outside. "Mommy," said Toby one night as she was putting him to bed, "why is everyone mad at us?" Sarah stroked her son's curly hair, feeling her heart break. "Not everyone is mad, my love. Some people just don't understand that Mommy is trying to do what's right. But if they don't like it, why don't we stop?" The child's innocent question echoed in Sarah's mind all night. There were moments when she really thought about giving up, especially when she saw her children suffering. But then she remembered the words from Arthur Harrison's diary. He had spent years trying to prove that Song of the Heartland was his creation, dying without seeing justice done. If she gave up now, she would be betraying not only her own family, but also the memory of that lonely man. The first hearing of the lawsuit took place 3 months later. Sarah woke up that morning with a nervous knot in her stomach. She put on her only good outfit, a navy blue set she had bought for Thomas's funeral, and walked to the courthouse in the neighboring city. The courtroom was full. Besides Dr. Victoria and herself, The record label's lawyers were present, Mr. Silas with his legal representative, and several onlookers who had come to watch what was already being called the music trial. When the judge, Judge William Miller, a man of about 50 with a serious expression, called the case, Sarah felt her legs tremble. Dr. Victoria presented the evidence clearly and in an organized manner. She showed the handwritten sheet music, Arthur's diary, the fraudulent contracts with the record label, and the testimony of Mrs. Beatrice, who confirmed hearing the composer playing the song years before it became famous. The record label's lawyers, a team of 3 men in expensive suits, tried to discredit the evidence. They argued that the sheet music could have been written after the song became popular, that the diary had no official date, and that the testimony of an elderly neighbor was unreliable. "Your Honor," said the record label's lead attorney, "this is clearly an opportunistic attempt to capitalize on the success of an established song. There is no technical evidence proving these documents are authentic." Sarah felt her heart sink. What if the lawyers were right? What if her entire fight was in vain? But Dr. Victoria was prepared for the counter-arguments. "Your Honor, we request a technical analysis of the sheet music and the diary." The age of the paper and ink could confirm that these documents predate the commercial release of the song. The judge ordered a technical examination, postponing the decision for another 2 months. During this waiting period, Sarah faced new challenges. Mr. Silas had spread word through town that she was spending money she didn't have on expensive lawyers, trying to paint her as irresponsible. Even worse, he began pressuring local merchants to no longer give her credit. With no steady job and relying on the goodwill of neighbors for sporadic cleaning and sewing work, Sarah found herself in an even more desperate financial situation. It was Mrs. Beatrice who saved her in that difficult moment. "Sarah, dear, come here, I need to talk to you." Sitting in the kitchen of Mrs. Beatrice's simple home, the elderly lady made an unexpected proposal. "I have some savings put away. It's not much, but it's enough for you and the children to get by for the next few months without going without." "Mrs. Beatrice, I can't accept that." "Yes, you can, and you will. I have no children or grandchildren. That money has been sitting idle for years. At least this way it will serve some good." Sarah couldn't hold back her tears. It was the first time in months that someone had shown her true generosity. "I'll pay back every cent as soon as I sort out my situation. You don't owe me anything, child. I just want to see you and those children happy." With Mrs. Beatrice's financial help, Sarah was able to focus better on the case. She began visiting Dr. Victoria regularly to follow the preparations for the next hearing. It was during one of these visits that she received news that changed everything. "Sarah, we have a problem," said Dr. Victoria, looking worried. "The record label has hired private investigators to look into your life. They found out about your husband's loan and are trying to use it to question your rights to the house." "What do you mean?" "They're arguing that if the loan was made irregularly, then the transfer of the house is also invalid. If they can prove that, you could lose the right to claim anything that was inside the property." Sarah felt the world spin around her. After so much suffering and struggle, was it possible she could lose everything over a technicality? Is there any way around this? "We're looking at the options, but I need you to tell me everything about this loan. Every detail could be important." Sarah spent the next hours recounting the last months of Thomas's life. He had lost his job at the mechanics shop in the neighboring city and was desperate to get money to pay for Sam's medical treatment, who had been born with a respiratory problem. Mr. Silas had appeared as a savior, offering a loan without many questions. Thomas, naive and desperate, had signed the papers without reading them properly, trusting the word of the man he'd known since childhood. "Thomas told me he had put our little house up as collateral," Sarah recounted. "I never knew he had also put Arthur's house up as additional security. And how did Mr. Silas have rights to Arthur's house?" "I don't know. Thomas never explained it to me properly." Dr. Victoria took careful notes, her expression growing more and more serious. "Sarah, I'll need to investigate thoroughly how Mr. Silas acquired Arthur's property. Something tells me there are more irregularities in this story. The investigation revealed shocking information. Arthur Harrison had died 5 years earlier, alone and forgotten. Since he had no known family, his assets should have gone to the state. but Mr. Silas had presented himself as a creditor for a non-existent debt, managing to acquire the property for a fraction of its real value. "Sarah, this is fraud," explained Dr. Victoria. "Mr. Silas forged documents to illegally take possession of Arthur's house. When your husband needed money, he used the stolen property as collateral for a loan with predatory interest. The discovery completely changed the course of the case. Now it wasn't just about copyrights, but also a criminal investigation into document forgery and misappropriation." The second hearing took place in a much tenser atmosphere than the first. Mr. Silas arrived accompanied by 2 lawyers, looking much less confident than before. When Dr. Victoria presented the evidence about the fraudulent acquisition of Arthur's house, he visibly paled. "Your Honor," argued Dr. Victoria, "we not only have irrefutable proof that Arthur Harrison was the true author of Song of the Heartland, but we have also proven that my client is the legitimate owner of all assets found in the residence, since Mr. Silas's acquisition of the property was fraudulent from the start." The judge listened to all the arguments in silence, his eyebrows raising several times during the presentation of the evidence. "Mr. Silas," said the judge in a stern voice, "the accusations against you are very serious. Would you like to make a statement?" Mr. Silas stammered some incoherent words, clearly not knowing how to defend himself. His lawyers asked for time to review the new documents, but the judge denied it. "This case has gone on long enough. Based on the evidence presented, I rule that Mrs. Sarah Miller is the rightful heir to all of Arthur Harrison's assets, including the copyright to the song of the Heartland." Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. After so much suffering and humiliation, she had finally won. But the victory in court was only the beginning of a new battle. The record label, facing the possibility of having to pay decades of unpaid royalties, decided to appeal the ruling. They claimed the process had been irregular and that they needed more time to investigate the authenticity of the documents. "Sarah, unfortunately this could take a few more months," explained Dr. Victoria. "But the good news is, even with the appeal, they will have to post a bond corresponding to the disputed royalties. You can request an advance on part of that amount for your immediate needs." For the first time in almost a year, Sarah smiled genuinely. It wasn't the complete victory she had hoped for, but it was a relief to know her financial struggles were coming to an end. With the advance, she was able to completely renovate the house. The roof was repaired, the electrical wiring was renewed, the plumbing was replaced, and the entire structure was reinforced. The house that had been a laughingstock was transformed into a cozy home for her and the children. The children flourished with the change. Toby became the cheerful, talkative boy he once was again, and Sam overcame his fears and nightmares. They now played in the renewed backyard, laughing and running as children should. The neighborhood also changed its attitude. The people who once looked at her with pity or contempt now greeted her respectfully on the street. Some even apologized for the treatment they had given her before. Mr. Silas, in turn, faced serious legal problems. Besides the criminal investigation into the document fraud, he had lost credibility in the town. His businesses began to decline when people discovered his dishonest practices. 6 months after the first victory in court, the final decision on the record label's appeal arrived. Sarah was in the kitchen preparing lunch when Dr. Victoria called with the news. "Sarah, the court upheld the original decision. The record label lost the appeal and will have to pay all accumulated royalties plus court costs." Sarah had to sit down, feeling her legs weaken with emotion. "How much? What's the total amount?" "Brace yourself. It's almost $2 million in unpaid royalties over the last 40 years, with monetary correction and interest." Sarah dropped the phone, her hands trembling uncontrollably. $2 million. It was more money than she had ever dreamed of having in her entire life. Toby and Sam ran to the kitchen upon hearing the sound of the phone dropping. "Mum, are you okay?" asked Toby worriedly. Sarah hugged them tightly, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "I'm great, my loves. Mom is great." That night, after putting the children to sleep, she sat in the yard of the renovated house, looking at the stars that Arthur Harrison so admired. She held in her hands the guitar that had belonged to the composer, gently stroking the strings. "Thank you, Mr. Arthur," she whispered into the night. "You didn't know it, but you saved my family." The following months brought wonderful changes to Sarah's and the children's lives. With the royalty money, she could invest in the children's education, hiring private tutors and enrolling them in a private school in the neighboring city. She also decided to honor Arthur Harrison's memory in a special way. She turned one of the rooms in the house into a small museum with the composer's instruments, sheet music, and personal belongings. A plaque at the entrance to the house read, "Home of Maestro Arthur Harrison, composer of Song of the Heartland." Sarah's story spread beyond the limits of the small rural town. Journalists from various parts of the country came to interview her, turning her struggle into a symbol of perseverance and justice. A documentary was produced about the case, telling both Sarah's story and Arthur Harrison's. The film won awards at national and international festivals, bringing the Song of the Heartland to a new generation of listeners. Mrs. Beatrice, who had been crucial to Sarah's victory, flatly refused to take back the money she had lent. "Sarah, dear, keep that money for the children. Seeing you happy is more than enough payment for me." Instead, Sarah bought a larger, comfortable house for Mrs. Beatrice and ensured she had medical assistance and care for the rest of her life. Mr. Henry Bennett, the music teacher who had helped her identify the melody, was also rewarded. Sarah funded the creation of a community music school where underprivileged children could learn instruments for free. The school was named the Arthur Harrison Music Institute and became a center of reference for music education in the region. The composer's own guitar was displayed in the institute's reception area, along with his original sheet music. 3 years after her victory, Sarah was unrecognizable. Not physically. She was still the same simple woman with dark hair and kind eyes. But her posture was different. She walked with the confidence of someone who had faced the greatest adversities and emerged victorious. Her children grew up in an environment of stability and opportunity. Toby, now 9 years old, showed a talent for music and had begun learning guitar at the institute his mother had created. Sam, at 7, was a happy and healthy child, with no trace of the respiratory problems that had so worried Thomas. One Sunday morning, Sarah was in the backyard watering the flowers she had planted when a car stopped in front of her house. Out stepped an elegant man about 50 years old who approached her with a smile on his face. "Mrs. Sarah Miller." "That's me. How can I help you?" "My name is Charles Harrison. I'm Joachim's brother." Sarah felt her heart race. Throughout the entire process, they had searched for Joachim's relatives without finding anyone. "Mr. Charles, please come in. I need to talk with you." In the living room, Charles explained that he had lived far away for most of his adult life, losing contact with his brother. He only learned of the Music Institute and the story of Song of the Heartland through the documentary that had aired on television. "Mrs. Sarah, I came here to thank you. My brother was always very talented, but also very proud and shy. I never imagined he had managed to compose something so beautiful. He truly was a special man, Mr. Charles. His compositions are beautiful." Charles looked around the house, admiring how it had been lovingly and tastefully renovated. "I didn't come here to claim anything," he said, anticipating a possible concern of Sarah's. "My brother has been dead for years, and I have my own life built. I just wanted to meet the woman who gave voice to his dreams." The conversation lasted the entire afternoon. Charles told stories from his childhood with Arthur, revealing that his brother had always been passionate about music, but that the family had no means to invest in his talent. Arthur always said that one day he would compose a song that would touch the heart of everyone in the Heartland, Charles said with tears in his eyes. It seems he succeeded, even if he didn't live to see the recognition. Before leaving, Charles made a special request. "Mrs. Sarah, would it be possible for me to play my brother's guitar just once? It's been 40 years since I've played an instrument, but I would really like to try Song of the Heartland on his guitar." Sarah took him to the small museum and carefully picked up Arthur's guitar. Charles tuned the instrument with the skill of someone who had been a musician in the past. When he began to play, the melody echoed through the house even more movingly than Sarah had ever heard. It was as if Arthur himself were there, playing his most cherished creation. Toby and Sam appeared in the bedroom doorway, drawn by the music. The three of them stood in silence, absorbing the beauty of that unique moment. When Charles finished, He handed the guitar back to Sarah with reverence. "Thank you. It was like talking with my brother one more time." After Charles left, Sarah sat in the backyard with the children, reflecting on all the extraordinary events that had transformed their lives. "Mum," said Toby, "do you think Mr. Arthur knew he was going to help us?" Sarah looked at her son, impressed by the depth of the question. "You know something, my dear. I think good people leave good things in the world, even after they're gone. Mr. Arthur left his music, and that music reached us when we needed it most. So we're going to leave good things for other people too. Yes, we are. That's why we started the Music Institute and helped Mrs. Beatrice. Good things need to keep passing from person to person." Sam, who had been quiet during the conversation, suddenly spoke. "Mom, I want to learn to play Song of the Heartland, like the man played today." Sarah smiled, hugging both her sons. "Of course, my dear. We'll learn together." In the years that followed, Sarah's story became legend in the region. She was often invited to give talks at schools and universities, telling her experience of how perseverance and faith in justice can change destinies. The Music Institute grew and became a national reference, receiving students from various parts of the country. Dozens of young talents were discovered and supported, many of them from humble families like Sarah's had been. Song of the Heartland itself gained new life. The song was re-recorded by several famous artists, but always with the proper credits to Arthur Harrison. The royalties continued to flow, allowing Sarah to expand her social projects. She created a support fund for widows in vulnerable situations, offering free legal advice and temporary financial support. Hundreds of women were helped by the program over the years. Mr. Silas, in turn, never fully recovered from the scandal. He was convicted of document forgery and had to pay heavy fines. His businesses went bankrupt and he moved away from the town a few years later. Ironically, the house he had given to Sarah as a joke became one of the most valuable properties in the area, not only for its historical value, but also for its prime location and unique architecture after the renovation. On a summer afternoon, 10 years after her victory, Sarah was sitting on the porch of the house, watching Toby, now 16, giving guitar lessons to children in the backyard. Sam, 14, played the flute to accompany the lesson. Mrs. Beatrice, now 80 years old but still sharp and active, was sitting beside her, knitting a little sweater for one of a neighbor's granddaughters. "Sarah, have you ever thought about how different your life would be if you had given up in those first days?" Sarah reflected on the question, remembering the most difficult moments of the struggle. "Mrs. Beatrice, I almost gave up several times. There were nights when I cried so much I thought I wouldn't be able to go on. But whenever I looked at the boys sleeping, I knew I had to try a little harder. And look what happened. You not only changed your family's life, but you also transformed the lives of so many people here in the region." At that moment, a young reporter arrived for a previously scheduled interview. He was one of the many journalists who still sought Sarah out to talk about her story, even after so much time. "Mrs. Sarah, what advice would you give to other people who are going through difficulties similar to what you faced?" Sarah thought carefully before answering. "I would say that sometimes life gives us things that seem worthless, but they can be exactly what we need. That old house that everyone considered a joke was actually my salvation. The difference was that I didn't give up looking for the good it had to offer me." "And about the people who doubted you?" "I don't hold a grudge against anyone. People act according to what they know and what they've experienced. Mr. Silas did wrong things, but I chose not to let his anger poison my heart. In the end, everyone reaps what they sow." The reporter continued with his questions, especially interested in the humanitarian part of Sarah's work. "How did you decide to invest the resources in social projects instead of just improving your own life?" "When you've had little, you understand the value of any help you receive. Mrs. Beatrice helped me when I had nothing to offer in return. Mr. Henry helped me understand the sheet music without charging anything. They were small gestures, but they made all the difference. Now I have the chance to be that person for other families." After the reporter left, Sarah walked to the small museum of Arthur Harrison inside her home. She made a point of visiting it at least once a week, as a way of keeping alive the memory of the man who had changed her destiny. That afternoon, She found a new letter in the museum's suggestion box. It was from a 12-year-old girl who had visited the place with her school. "Mrs. Sarah," the letter said, "I loved learning about Mr. Arthur's and your story. My mother is also a widow and we are going through hard times. After hearing your story, my mother said she won't give up on her dreams. Thank you for showing us that there is always hope." Sarah smiled, putting the letter away with hundreds of others she had received over the years. Each one represented a life touched by her story, a person who had found the courage not to give up. That night, after a family dinner, she picked up Arthur's guitar and went out to the backyard. It was a ritual she had developed over the years, playing Song of the Heartland under the starry sky, as a way of giving thanks for all the blessings she had received. Toby and Sam joined her, each with their own instrument. The melody that had begun in Arthur Harrison's solitude now echoed across the property, played by a united and happy family. Neighbors began to gather, as always happened when Sarah played in the backyard. Mrs. Enid came with her embroidery, Mr. Henry Bennett arrived with his harmonica, and even some children from the Institute appeared with their instruments. Within minutes, the backyard transformed into a small, impromptu concert, with Song of the Heartland being played by an orchestra of friends and neighbors. Sarah looked around, observing all those faces illuminated by the music, and felt a deep gratitude for every difficult moment she had faced. Without those challenges, she would never have discovered the strength she possessed, nor would she have found her true mission in life. When the music ended, everyone applauded and began to say their goodbyes, returning to their homes with smiles on their faces. Sarah stayed in the backyard for a few more minutes, enjoying the tranquility of the night. "Thank you, Arthur," she whispered once more to the stars, "for everything." And in the gentle night breeze, she could swear she heard a reply. "Thank you, Sarah, for giving voice to my dream." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The years kept passing, and Sarah's story became part of the local folklore. Tourists would visit the Arthur Harrison House Museum, and many left inspired not only by the music, but by the story of courage and perseverance of the woman who had given voice to the forgotten composer's dreams. Toby grew up and became a professional musician, specializing in Brazilian regional music. He always began his shows by telling the story of Arthur Harrison and his mother, keeping the memory of both alive. Sam followed a different path, graduating in law with a specialization in intellectual property. He dedicated himself to helping humble artists protect their copyrights, preventing other cases like Arthur Harrison's from happening again. Sarah, now 43, continued living in the same house she had received as a joke. She had refused several purchase offers, explaining that that place wasn't just her home, but a symbol of hope for the entire community. On a special September morning, exactly 15 years after receiving the keys to the old house, Sarah woke to the sound of music coming from the backyard. Intrigued, she went out to investigate and found a moving scene. Dozens of children from the Music Institute were in the backyard, along with their teachers, preparing a surprise presentation. In the center of the group was a new plaque, made by the students themselves, which read, "Here lives Mrs. Sarah, who taught us that we should never give up on our dreams." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as the children began to sing Song of the Heartland in an impromptu choir. Their young voices filled the morning air with the melody that had changed so many lives. Toby and Sam appeared from their nearby houses. Both had built their own homes near their mother, keeping the family together. Mrs. Beatrice arrived leaning on her cane, but with eyes shining with emotion. "Surprise, Mom!" the sons shouted in unison, hugging her affectionately. The impromptu party lasted the whole morning. Neighbors brought cakes and sodas, turning the backyard into a true community celebration. Sarah was honored not only as the woman who had fought for Arthur Harrison's rights, but as someone who had dedicated her life to helping others. Dr. Victoria, now a successful and respected lawyer, was also present at the celebration. She had become a great friend of Sarah's over the years, and always said that the copyright case had been the most rewarding of her career. "Sarah, do you know that without your courage, I wouldn't have become the professional I am today either? Your case taught me that justice is worth more than money. In the late afternoon, when everyone had left, Sarah sat on the porch with a photo album documenting her journey. There were pictures of the house before and after the renovation, images of the first classes at the Music Institute, newspaper clippings about the case, and dozens of thank you letters from people who had been inspired by her story. One photo in particular caught her attention. It was Charles Harrison, the brother of Arthur, playing the guitar the last time he had visited. He had passed away 2 years prior, but not before leaving a will donating his own assets to the Music Institute, so that my brother's music may keep playing in people's hearts, Charles had written in his last letter to Sarah. That night, Sarah decided to write her own memoirs. She had received several offers from publishers interested in publishing her story, but had always postponed the project. Now, surrounded by the tranquility of her home and the certainty that she had fulfilled her mission, she felt ready to tell her version of the events that had transformed her life. She sat at the kitchen table, the same one where she had read the first letters from Arthur Harrison 15 years earlier, and began to write, "My name is Sarah Miller, and this is the story of how an old house, given as a joke, became the symbol of my resurrection. But this is not just my story. It is also the story of Arthur Harrison, a forgotten composer whose dreams found a voice through my struggle. It is the story of all the people who believed in me when I doubted myself. And it is the story of how sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as the greatest challenges." As she wrote, Sarah could hear in the distance the sound of someone playing guitar. It was Toby in his home, rehearsing for a show that weekend. The familiar melody of Song of the Heartland floated through the night, as it had for so many years. She smiled, continuing to write her story. Every word she put on paper was a way of thanking everyone who had been part of her journey, from Arthur Harrison to Mrs. Beatrice, from her children to all the students of the Music Institute. When she finished the first chapter, it was almost midnight. Sarah carefully put the papers away and headed to the bedroom. Before sleeping, as she did every night, she stopped in front of the portrait of Arthur Harrison that she had found among his belongings and had framed. "Good night, Arthur. Thank you for another day of blessed life." And in the quiet of the night, while Song of the Heartland still echoed softly through the neighborhood, Sarah fell asleep with a smile on her face, knowing she had turned a cruel joke into a story of hope that would continue to inspire people for generations. In the following months, Sarah worked intensely on her memoirs. The book would be published by a national publisher, with all profits going to the expansion of the Music Institute. The work would become a bestseller, touching millions of readers across the country. But for Sarah, the greatest success was not in the sales, but in the letters she kept receiving from people who had found the courage not to give up after reading her story. One of these letters was particularly special. It came from a young 25-year-old widow living in a distant city who had received an old, abandoned house as part of a complicated inheritance. "Mrs. Sarah," the letter said, "everyone here says I should sell the house for any price and leave town. But after reading your story, I decided to stay and fight. Perhaps my old house also has secrets waiting to be discovered. Thank you for teaching me that we should never give up." Sarah carefully folded the letter and placed it in her special file. It was further proof that Arthur Harrison's music kept playing in hearts, now not only through its melody, but through the story of courage that had been born from it. And so in the small rural town where it all began, the house that had been given as a joke became a beacon of hope, proving that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the most unlikely places, waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to look. The music kept playing, the dreams kept blooming, and the story of Sarah Miller and Arthur Harrison continued to inspire people to never give up fighting for what is right, no matter how impossible victory may seem. The end. This was a fictional story created to touch our hearts. Now tell us what you thought of this inspiring story of courage and perseverance. Do you believe Sarah made the right decisions in fighting for Arthur Harrison's rights, even while facing so many difficulties? Leave your honest opinion in the comments and tell us where you're following us from. Don't forget to leave your like to support our channel and subscribe so you don't miss other moving stories we've prepared for you.